Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, June 16th, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues Mike Bonin and Bob Blumenfield, and we are ready to begin. Members, the only item that I would propose for the moment as a consent candidate is item number 4. If there's no objection to approval of that item. And seeing none, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the city attorney's recommendations. And then that brings us to item number 5. Well, first of all, do we have any general public comment cards?
No general.
Okay, there's no general public cards, so public comment is closed. If anybody would like to speak on any of the agenda items, please fill out one of these cards and bring them forward. And that brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5 is motion Martinez-Huizar O'Farrell relative to requesting city departments to report on the number of legal and illegal marijuana dispensaries in the city, feasibility of earmarking a percentage of medical marijuana taxes towards enforcement efforts, and related matters.
All right. I have one card on that, but I'd like to hear staff on this matter first. And let's take 5 and 6 together. Did you already read 6? I'm sorry.
No. Item number 6 is motion Buscaino-Englander relative to requesting the Office of Finance, with the assistance of the City Attorney's Office, to report back within 30 days on options to limit or discontinue the issuance of business tax registration certificates for medical marijuana collectives, which are non-compliant with Proposition D.
All right. So these, I'd like to have the CAO, the City Attorney's Office, the PD, and Finance, please.
I believe our CAO staff is on their way.
Sorry?
Our CAO staff is on their way.
Okay. All right. So I got an indication that, at least from the City Attorney's perspective and PD's perspective, that you're not prepared to report on these matters yet. But if that's wrong and you have input that you'd like to provide at this point, this is your option.
That would be correct. It's very much an incomplete number at this point.
Okay. So what is it going to take to be able to get that? What, in terms of time and resources, what is it that we're going to need to devote to ascertain that, or is it even ascertainable?
That's probably a yes and a no. And let me introduce myself. Captain Ann Clark. I'm the commanding officer of Gang and Narcotics Division. Dispensaries are forever a moving target. You've got the 134, but what you also have happening with those 134 is if you have multiple owners, let's say. We are hearing anecdotally that some of them are looking at this as a franchise. So what was 1 could now be 3 or 4, theoretically. So your 134 may be more than that.
Which they should know is entirely inconsistent with the ordinance that was initiated by the people. But, okay, that's
yes,
their position.
Indeed, and as are the probably in the hundreds of illegal dispensaries that are out there. The means by which we've undertaken counting them thus far has been through the senior lead officers in each geographic area. The assumption being they know their areas best, they can go out and count whatever is in their basic car area. That information is being funneled to the City Attorney's Office, but with locations opening, closing, and constantly moving, again, I don't know that you will ever get a perfect number because it's ever changing.
And that would be my expectation as well, because they seem to, the illegal operations seem to open as quickly or more quickly than we can shut them down. And so it will always be a number that is changing.
Yeah.
So I guess to that point, additional time is not going to allow you to have a more complete answer than we could get now.
Correct. You're probably never going to get perfection. You're going to get a best
Right.
guess.
So what would be the best, because it's been a frustration, I think, for the council and for the public to not be able to answer this basic question. How many marijuana dispensaries are there in the city of Los Angeles? No one knows. And that's a great frustration to our constituents to not have a handle on that. So I'm looking for, some suggestions about how we can do a better job of refining that and making that information publicly accessible. One of the things that was called for by this motion is actually, mapping it. And I could see, having an interactive map as an option so that the public can report marijuana dispensaries as well, and have a process like that so that it's more in real time. But does the department have any recommendations for how we can do a better job of keeping not just count, but keeping track of locations and where they are, where they're moving to, so that we can target enforcement resources appropriately?
Yes, I think, again, going back to the model of using the senior lead officers is probably the best way to do it, but we would have to go back to them on a pretty regular basis and ask, here's your list, is this still accurate? Have they moved? Have they closed? Are they in another part of your geographic area? Have they moved outside of the city limits? I think there's a method we can utilize, and I understand from what was written that there's a request that we work with Building and Safety on that, and my assumption is that so that Building and Safety can do the mapping. Is that correct?
That's...
Can I add just a
sure.
thought to this, which is, and you touched on it, which is the crowdsourcing. I mean, we can have an app on the 311 app, report your, dispensary, and just utilize all the neighborhood councils and all the people out there, and we can get that information fairly quickly. It wouldn't be super, no guarantee on accuracy, but it would
Sure.
add to whatever formal process that you have with the SLOs and everyone else. To make that available and let us publicize that that's available, that would engage the community in a positive way. So I would want to encourage or instruct them to move along those lines, to use crowdsourcing 311 app, publicly available. It's not that complicated to do.
And I completely agree. We're playing whack-a-mole here, and it's, I think, important for the public to be able to provide as much information as we can, so that as soon as the frustration is, we know where a legal operation can be under Measure D, but when we see them popping up on the map in areas that aren't included within that scope, then we know that that is inherently an illegal operation that should be shut down immediately. So as long as we have that information and it's current, and law enforcement can be on top of that, and the city attorney can be on top of that, it seems to me that we could start to make some inroads in pushing back on some of the illegal operators, and I think the crowdsourcing option is an excellent one. Mr. Bonin?
Thanks. I totally agree with the crowdsourcing thing. I mean, I've switched from Google Maps to Waze because of the crowdsourcing. And I made it from LAX to Brentwood Friday night during rush hour in 21 minutes, which is miraculous because I used Waze because of crowdsourcing. And we could definitely do that. And because right now I think our council offices are sort of becoming a crowdsourcing in a way, because we're getting all the calls, and there's no clear tracking, as a senior lead officer, tracking them. How do we know what's ranked and all that? So I strongly encourage that. I mean, is that something that you think is possible?
It sounds as if it is. Yes, we haven't used that tool before, but it sounds viable.
Okay. So one of the problems we're facing, because we have a lot of them in my district, and I fully support Measure D. I'm glad to see the ones that are pre-ICO. My predecessor uses one of them regularly, and it literally saved his life. But we're having two types of problems. We're having the new ones just popping up all over the place. Then we're also having ones that are on the list of 134 that are trying to move into locations that are not Prop D compliant. Now, some of that is intentional. They're trying to get around the law, and we've been trying to push back on that so the camel's nose doesn't get under the tent, because once one of them does, they're all going to start doing it. We fought one at Centinela and Palms that was one of the 130, but was a location that was not compliant. And the city attorney's office did exceptional work in taking civil action against them and making sure they couldn't locate there. But then there's also ones that are confused about where they can locate, that are finding locations that are not Prop D compliant, but they don't quite understand why. You know, I got a call from one of the good operators about 2 months ago who was trying to relocate, and there is a median in Venice that under one of my predecessors was turned into a park. So he's like, is this really a park? Because that would mean they couldn't move across the street from it. Is there a way we can do sort of an overlay map of where it's permissible to have one? I mean, you can't have it within a certain area of a park or a youth center. You can't have it within, you can't share a common alleyway or something like that with an R1 or something. Is there a way we can do that? Or does the fact that a youth center could pop up make it impossible?
I don't know that that's a police department answer. That might come from someone else at the table that could answer whether that's doable.
It's a planning issue, and when we were drafting the ordinance, we in fact had overlays like that. Whether or not it is current, given the examples you raise, is another question, because it probably does change.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask for clarification. Steve O'Malley from the Department of Building and Safety. The second instruction actually includes the Department of Building and Safety, and I just wanted to state into the record that the Department of Building and Safety does not have any mechanism to even put its hands on the list. This is not in LAMC, or it's not in the building code, and it's not in the zoning code either. And so we actually have no enforcement mechanism, neither do we have any way to get the list.
What do you mean you have no way to get the list?
If we have a list, we will have to obtain it from one of the few departments. I know that potentially Office of Finance has a list, and I don't know if they can share that list.
Of course they can. It's a publicly available list.
Yes. One of the report backs that we need to do is item number 3, is to let you know exactly how much we have, and we can't provide that.
Okay.
Okay.
So unless we get it from them, we would have to get direction on what we should do with the list.
Well, why don't we go to the Plum Committee's recommendation number 3 then, and ask Finance to speak to that a moment, and maybe that'll give us some suggestions as to how we might be able to bring building and safety in as well.
Okay. Robert Lee, Office of Finance. In regards to your questions on number 3, we have reviewed our files and we found approximately 972 BTRCs that are registered to these MMDs within our system. And of those, we were requesting the amount of funds collected. Since inception on the LO50, we've collected about 10.2 million. And for the 2014 renewal, with the advent of Prop D, and going from the $50 to $60 classification amount, we collected about 2.1 million for the 2014 renewal on these entities. But if one of the issues is ordinance should allow us to provide the legal name and the address of all these entities that we have a BTRC in our system for either PD or building and safety to proceed on how they won't need to do anything on that side.
Okay. So the number of BTRCs you have that are current as of today is what number again?
972.
Those are current as of today.
Yes.
So you have business names and addresses and an identification that that business is a medical marijuana collective in your files, and you have 972 of those.
Yes, they would have registered under the LO50 classification in order to pay their business tax certificate, so we would have them in our system. However, as stated by PD, they're moving targets.
Okay.
So
we have 972 business tax certificates, and we know that no more than 135 of those can be legal operations. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. We have a significant disconnect here, then. So is it possible for you merely to provide your list of names and addresses to the police department and the city attorney's office so that they can compare it against the Prop D compliant list and begin enforcing against the nearly more than 800 operations that are illegal?
I'll follow up my chain of command, but master information such as legal name and address is very allowable for anybody, so I don't see why there would be an issue for me to provide to the other departments.
Is that list publicly available?
At this time, because we just extracted it, no. I would have to follow through whether it's available. Otherwise, if an individual entity came to us and requested information, we would only be able to give the legal name and the address and specific master information on any of these PTRCs per
Sure.
ordinance. We would not be able to go beyond that.
But if, for example, the Daily News or one of us were to request the list of medical marijuana collectives in the city of Los Angeles from you that have BTRCs, they would get that list?
Yes.
Okay. I'm struggling to figure, to deal with how it is then that we're not staying more ahead of the curve in enforcement of Prop D.
I mean, it sounds like it's publicly available information. It's the kind of stuff that ultimately we want to see up on the web along with all of our open data movement. So I don't see any legal reason why you can't just turn around and hand it to him.
Nor do
Of course, I defer to the city attorney, but if they're okay with it, we do what we need to.
But I'm sorry, but it's not a building and safety issue either, because building and safety doesn't have enforcement authority over Prop D, as I understand it, unless
That's correct.
they have a building or a safety problem.
Right.
This is a law enforcement issue.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to officially request a copy of the list, and if you wouldn't mind CCing LAPD and the city attorney on it, that would be great.
Yeah, and then I'll put it on my website.
Well, on the other hand, we don't necessarily want to be in the business of advertising.
Or I'll hand it to the appropriate department. I mean, it just...
Okay, so would that be at least a helpful starting point, or do you?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so let's at least get that to the PD. Then I'd like to also request that finance, the PD, and ITA work together on identifying the possibility of a crowdsourcing mechanism by which we can supplement this information. as
Putting
well.
it into the 311
Yeah.
app that already exists.
Okay, so that will be an additional instruction to add to this list. City Attorney, I'm inclined to think that the update on enforcement might involve closed session discussion. And if that's the case, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we can get a more detailed update on that at some future date, which might, as I suspect it would, involve closed session discussion as well, since it involves enforcement strategy and pending litigation and so forth. Is that right?
Right. If there were litigation or threatened litigation that our land use attorneys were handling, then that would be the basis for closed session.
Okay. All right. And then,
I'm sorry, may I just add
Yeah,
one
sure.
thing? And that is that from enforcement, you've got the land use lawyers who are dealing with the land use aspects, and then you have our criminal attorneys. So I'm not sure that, I'm not here speaking for the criminal
Sure.
division of the office. So they are pursuing enforcement from a criminal perspective, not from the land use perspective.
Can you speak to the land use perspective now, or?
I don't know that I can speak to the land
Okay.
use. I do know that there is litigation, and to the extent that there is litigation available, that would be something that would be the topic for closed session.
Yeah.
Or if they had threatened or pending litigation, so I'm not exactly sure what the status of all of that is right now. I do know that one of the issues that you had asked about was the ability to earmark medical marijuana taxes for enforcement efforts, and I think that to the extent that you're looking at earmarking, I don't think it's really an earmark per se. I think it's really looking at revenue coming in and then using revenue in an amount possibly tied to what the revenue derived from medical marijuana is, so that we're not creating a special tax where essentially just
Exactly.
using. And that basically the office is in a position where we have the prosecutors and the land use lawyers that are all geared toward enforcing. So
Yeah, and I will just go ahead and telegraph my feelings about this, even though this is only requesting a report back on the feasibility of such a designation. I mean, this is why we have a budget process. This is general fund income. It
Correct.
comes into the general fund, and it gets appropriated out of the general fund. So I would be uncomfortable, I'll tell you right now, in identifying an amount that's predetermined to be spent on a specific purpose when this is a general tax that goes into the general fund.
Correct.
So, but that being said, I'm happy to consider a feasibility report that this requests. So members, there's 4 recommendations that the Plum Committee developed pursuant to this motion, and then we also have the proposal in item number 6 with a report back on options to limit or discontinue the issuance of BTRCs for non-compliant collectives.
On number 4, and I agree with you on number 4 in the general tax, I think, and I don't know if this came back from, we talked about this a little bit in Budget Committee, but the idea of a compliance fee or something that was tacked on that would be earmarked as opposed to just the medical marijuana taxes. Is there any feasibility, and I don't know if it's appropriate to have that in, feasibility of having some sort of compliance fee that would have a nexus that could be used for enforcement?
that you would be adding on to the,
I don't know that we can add on anything on, given the way Measure D is written, but if there were, I understand the problem that was identified by the chair, and I'm very sympathetic to, which is you don't want to take the general fund revenue and apply it, earmark it in such a way. Different than if there were a compliance fee, that there was a nexus, so that it was more of a fee than a general tax. And if there was such a fee, then that we could raise to help create additional prosecution.
we're certainly happy to look into that question. I think that at this point, any fee would have to be compliant with Proposition 26. And the other thing is whether we could impose a fee for our criminal enforcement efforts. So, because I assume that by enforcement, you're looking at both from a land use perspective as well as from a criminal enforcement. So that would be something that we would want to take a closer look at.
What about, and maybe this is what you were saying, but what about fines for operating a business that's in violation of Measure D?
Well, I think the fine would be different than a fee. So you would have to find some sort of a violation, and I don't know if Prop D in and of itself may already provide for some sort of a fine process. I'm looking to my colleague who may be more familiar, but that would be part of the enforcement, what may already be in the ordinance, or we could certainly look at ways, but that fine would come into place after somebody had already been found to violate a provision.
So, but that could be used as a funding source for further. Could you, when you do your report back on that which Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Blumenfield, and I'll join them, have telegraphed their position, could you report back and include some information about the potential of a fine structure that could be used as a revenue source?
Certainly.
Because if it's a matter of someone on the council proposing we, have a steep fine for violating Measure D, I think there'd probably be some sympathy for that.
Certainly.
So instruction number 4, or recommendation number 4 from the Plum Committee calls for a recommendation regarding medical marijuana taxes and revenues collected by the city. So that should encompass any potential fees and fines,
Right.
I think, that might be able to be utilized for enforcement purposes.
Is there, I mean, for the 835 ones that are clearly out of compliance, and when you shut them down, is there a fee that goes with that under the current structure? Or not a fee, a fine, sorry, for being out of compliance?
I will check on that. I don't know because I'm not involved in closing them down. So, but we can certainly check and see if there is some sort of a fine for having operated a dispensary without being compliant with Prop D.
Love to have that information as well.
Okay, so just further to item number 3, and thank you for the report on the number. Part of this request from Plum as well was whether finance makes a distinction between legal and illegal medical marijuana collectives and dispensaries when they issue permits, and whether the Office of Finance coordinates with LADBS and or city planning prior to the issue of any permits.
Unfortunately, Office of Finance and the business tax registration certificate specifically is for tax compliance only. We don't have the regulatory ability to do that. In fact, we've asked in various occasions, and we've been told that we do not have the legal ability to deny anybody a BTRC.
If I wanted to sell heroin, I could get a business tax registration certificate?
The purpose of the certificate is more or less for tax measure and compliance on that. If you note, on the actual certificate itself and on the ordinance, it states that, that literally we do not look at the legalities or whether or not it's legal. For example, nothing on this certificate construes that as authorizing the conduct or continuance of illegal businesses or of legal businesses in an illegal manner. So literally, we can't speak to that. If someone comes up and asks for it, we know it might be illegal, but per ordinance, per what we are restricted from by being non-regulatory, we cannot deny it.
So if I wanted to sell whale meat or Cuban cigars or heroin or handguns, I could get a BTRC?
Well, it would raise a few eyebrows on our part. We would probably go talk to city attorney and say, we have a query, but overall, we would defer on the legal advice from the city attorney.
So could you then, because you just said under those circumstances you might check with city attorney, if we know that there are 135 that have a legal ability to operate as a dispensary and they already have their BTRCs, wouldn't it make sense then to presume that there is something legally questionable about any additional application for a BTRC and therefore refer that to city attorney? You still have to process it, but refer it.
Yes, but the thing is, we would still have to give them BTRC. I mean, we could note and defer it, but we would still have to give it. And that's the thing. And we do not have the ability to not do that.
And I get that from a legal perspective. I think the practical point that Mr. Bonin and I think that we've all been discussing is once we have that list, in the same way that it might raise suspicions if somebody chose to open a casino on Wilshire Boulevard and get a PTRC, that it's more than a suspicion. We know that the majority of those who have BTRCs are operating illegally. We know that with certainty. So we can give that list, as we've discussed today, we'll give that list to PD. I think planning and building and safety should probably also get those lists, and the city attorney's office should get that list. And I would hope that those agencies would utilize that list to be able to compare that with their compliance list and start operating to close down some of these bad operators. This is kind of the opposite of the Al Capone situation. You know, Al Capone went to prison for tax evasion. Here, you know, these people are avoiding tax evasion, problems, but they're operating illegally. So let's I think we have agreement and consensus here that at least that step can be taken to get that list to the appropriate agencies to begin taking action.
And updated, say, weekly. I mean, because any new one coming in is obviously non-compliant with Measure D.
And on your final question, like you were saying, whether or not Office of Finance coordinates with the Building and Safety and Planning, no, we do not. But as you say, if we put something in place and it's just providing specific information as to address and legal name on a weekly basis.
Okay. Any other comments on these recommendations, members?
I had a question that came up about the franchising situation. Franchising is not permitted under Measure D.
No,
right?
and when I say franchise, I don't mean franchise in the literal sense where you can franchise out a McDonald's or something like that. But the idea that if you have multiple owners of one dispensary, they begin to think, well, if one is good and we're all members, then I can take my share and go open up somewhere else. So I don't have any definitive evidence of that, but anecdotally we are hearing that that is happening.
And is City Attorney able to provide any written warning or guidance to the legally permitted 135 dispensaries about that situation?
I'm sorry, that would again be more likely than not our criminal side, and I don't know what they're doing. I believe they have sent letters out with respect to landlords that are leasing to unpermitted dispensaries or those dispensaries that don't meet the requirements of Prop D.
Okay, that's not the same situation, but it was a question that would go to the criminal division.
And I think that in some ways where, my criminal colleagues aren't here, but everyone is sort of trying to feel their way through this. The other situation I can just tell you about, because the Office of Finance the Public Finance Division is one that I supervise, that we also have medical marijuana dispensaries suing us because they're claiming that we're not issuing the VTRC, or that they have VRTC, they've opened up, they've spent money, and now they're being told they have to close down. We clearly, think that is not going to be a winning case for them, but nevertheless, you have a variety of things that are beginning to develop now as a result of Prop D.
So that's an interesting point. And although I think it is a losing legal argument, let me make that clear on the public record, I could see, some operation trying to take the position, which I think would be specious, that, they issued me a BTRC, so there's some detrimental reliance. I invested my money, I got a business license, and now they're shutting me down. That clearly makes no sense from a legal perspective, because all they have to do is look at Prop D, and they know whether they're legal or not legal. But just to eliminate any risk of that, is it possible for finance, when you issue those BTRCs, or maybe you already do this, to issue it with some sort of letter or warning that says that the fact that you are being issued a business license does not indicate that you are in compliance with any other provision of law? Do you already do that?
It's on the back of the business certificate.
Perfect. Okay, good.
And I believe that some of that language was actually transferred to the front of the permit.
Good.
So that there has been an effort to work on the language. There always was language that said this is not a permit, this is not authorizing you to conduct the business. That language has been changed, moved from the back to the front, and they're looking at ways of trying to make that even more clear. I think it is clear now, but looking at whatever they think might be helpful.
Okay, great. Members, any other questions for staff at this point? We have one public speaker, so thank you very much. Before we act on these suggestions, I'd like to invite Sarah Armstrong to come forward. Ms. Armstrong, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Armstrong. I'm the Director of Legal and Political Outreach for the Greater Los Angeles Collective Alliance, which is the oldest trade association for legal medical marijuana collectives in the country. In that capacity, I use the Freedom of Information Act to obtain the LO50 complete list, and I gave to Paul Koretz's office this morning a copy of every LO50 listed for your council district. You can get it from them and see exactly where you are at. I can tell you where we're at. We're very, very worried. It seems to us that we see new places opening all the time. In poor areas of Los Angeles, there have actually been murders. You don't read about it in the paper, but it's going on. In the section where Mike Bonner talked about the situation at Sentinel and Palms, that was a case of corporate identity theft against one of my members. And we cooperated with Mr. Bonin and the police to make sure that this situation was ended as quickly as possible. 10% of my membership have been the victims of corporate identity theft, and the most egregious ones have always come because there were nothing going on in the issuance of the LO50s up until very recently required you to prove that you were actually the legal owner of that LO50. My cat can get a BTRC, and my cat, up until recently, could go down and claim to be just about anybody and change an LO50. This needs to be rectified. You cannot complain of illegal activity if you are the mechanism by which that illegal activity takes place. I believe that my membership can be of immense help to you in mapping where these illegal places are. They live in their neighborhoods.
Take 2 more minutes. You had
Thank
2
you.
cards on 2 items, so it's
Okay.
fine.
They live in these neighborhoods, they work in these neighborhoods. I get complaints all the time of new places opening up. We have dutifully informed our membership to please let the city attorney and the police lead officer at the division know about this, but unfortunately it is such a tsunami that even with all the assets that you've thrown at it, it's not getting fixed. The city attorney has hit on a winning formula. He is closing these places down by targeting the landlords. And when you do that, the landlords never ever rent again. This is working. Please, please give him the money he needs to get this done fast. The LO50 tax monies are required to be paid by both legal and illegal entities. Being an illegal entity does not excuse you from paying tax on goods sold. If you go after these bad actors, and you know who they are because you have BTRCs on them, you may again see your collections go from 2.1 million to 7 million as they did in the first year. It's a good strategy. We stand ready to help you in any way we can. We have had personalized inquiries from many of you trying to find lawyers for our people or other miscellaneous information. We're always happy to collaborate. We believe that the city attorney has found a winning formula. We watched 2 previous city attorneys struggle with it and fail. Please support this effort. And please call upon us anytime that we can help you. Because this situation is getting so bad, it's a black market. And when you have a black market economy on top of a legitimate economy, the problems just never stop. So, thank you for your time. Please obtain from Paul Koretz's office your lists of LO50s. Mr. Krikorian, I'm sorry to tell you that you lead the pack with 137. Mr. Englander is trailing behind with, I think, something like 13. But it's all way too much. Let us help you. Let us go forward together.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. And just for the record, just in this last budget, we did in fact fund additional resources for the city attorney specifically for this purpose, and we just for the reason that you just said, why this is important. So thank you.
I know you gave 4 more attorneys, and that's a good start. But these LO50 monies, they're a new income stream. Nobody's really gotten too attached to them. And if you could shoot some their way to the city attorney and the police, I think this situation would get fixed very quickly. And it's a temporary income stream because we're going to fix it, right?
Thank you very much. All right, members, we've proposed a few amendments to the Plum recommendations. I think it's been clearly enough stated, has it? So, any other comments or suggestions? So, as amended, then the committee will approve the recommendations consistent with the Plum Committee's report as amended by the discussion that we've had today and the additional suggestions. And we'll advance that to council. Okay. And that's as to 5 and 6.
And on item number 6, that item was not heard by the Plum Committee. So the action this committee is recommending.
So the motion is that the Office of Finance, with the assistance of the City Attorney's Office, report back in 30 days on options to limit or discontinue the issuance of BTRCs for collectives which are non-compliant. I think that's entirely consistent with everything that we've said, so that will be approved and move forward to council.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 was continued from your meeting on June 9th, 2014. It is an Office of Finance report relative to a request from the Department of Transportation from an escheatment from their Transportation Trust Fund.
DOT here? Okay, come on forward, please. I continued this last time just because I had 2 simple questions. One is, what's the source of these funds that are being escheated? And 2 is, what has the department done to ensure that to the greatest extent possible, that the funds are returned to their rightful owners before they're escheated?
Yeah, my name is Baljit Soni. I'm the principal accountant at DOT Accounting. And these monies were deposited in the Department of Trust Fund, Fund 840. The trust fund ensures the money in the fund for the safeguard of the people who pay money into these funds. So these monies that were paid were for specific services like to put up signs and whatnot many, many years ago. And to the extent that the work was done, money was refunded and given to the payees. But there was no record for the last 10 years of these monies that were placed. All services were provided. And the department did their best faith efforts to contact these people who were on the list as to, we want to return this money back to you. We mailed them based on the addresses that we had on the file. And all the people who responded, the monies was refunded to them. So then we revised our list and we based it on all the people who did not respond. In addition to that, we also put this on the website, on the LODOT website, as to whoever has a claim to these funds can fill up these forms and have a claim on these funds.
So this was the website that the department created a year or so ago in response to a previous escheatment request when we asked that all that be put. Great.
That's
so it's
right.
all going into the single website. So anybody who thinks that they may have money owed to them can go to that website and search it before it gets escheated.
That's right.
Okay, terrific. That's what I really needed to know. Members, anything further on this?
I was just tickled to have an opportunity to learn terminology that dated from feudal England.
Yeah, it's a neat word. isn't it?
Sheetman, is that like, did you learn that in law school?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's a good Scrabble word, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can take cheat and then you could add on to it and get extra points. So, all right. Thank you very much. Anything further, members? Okay. Without objection, it'll be the action of the committee then to approve Office of Finance recommendations. Thanks for the explanation. That brings us then to item number 8.
Item number 8 is an Office of Finance report relative to a request from the Police Department for an escheatment from their unclaimed money seized incidental to arrest trust fund to the City General Fund.
And again, good afternoon. If you could just explain the general nature of the funds that are included in this,
This is the money that is seized when a person is arrested, and it's either money that they have on the person either through, then it's been stolen, or it's money that they have, at the time that they're arrested in their wallet.
Okay, so money that they have that there's no claim that it needs to be used as evidence or that it was wrongfully obtained, presumably is released immediately upon their
Right.
the disposition of their matter.
Correct.
So anything that's left in here, probably illegally acquired funds.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has anything been, what steps are taken to ensure their return to their rightful owner, if there are any such steps?
Are you from Office of Finance?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a process that's been in place for many, many years through the Office of Finance to make those notifications and to publicize when these funds are going to be available, at this time, when they're going to go to the general fund.
Through the Office of the City Clerk, the publications are routinely sent out so that they're within the time frame for all the funds that are over 3 years, that have had no claims, and they are circulated.
Okay, so all of these funds have been sitting for at least 3 years
Yes.
following the notification?
Right.
Okay. Any questions, members?
I just had one question. I noticed that some of these funds have been sitting there since Nixon was in the White House and Sonny and Cher were still together. Have they been earning interest?
When they go into the general fund pool, some of these funds are earning interest, but I'll have to double check on that.
I'd be curious. I mean, if we're holding on to money for a while, we may as well make a few cents off it.
Yeah. It could be 5 cents, they're usually very small amounts that sort of cumulatively, just kind of add up.
But actually, that raises another point. We've done this from time to time. I think we do it pretty much annually, don't we?
Quarterly.
Quarterly?
Quarterly.
Okay. So why is it that there would still be some that are so aged as that if we're doing
It could be that the investigating officer has released them every once in a while. They get a report I believe every month, being told what money is still sitting there that they need, or what property is still there that they need to dispose of or handle. Can't think of the right word right now, sorry.
Right.
But, so that occasionally will happen. Right now, about 3 years ago, we put a system in place that all cash that's put into that's deposited automatically will move through the system on this cycle. So this old money was probably something that was sitting in evidence and hadn't been deposited, because once it's in the bank, it has no evidentiary value.
Sure.
So we put it in a place that all that money went in. So about 3 years ago, we issued it well over $1 million because it was all this old money that had been sitting there. So that process is currently in place.
Okay.
This just happens to be a really big
Okay.
chunk that's going forward.
Just following up, does that mean that we're now sort of up to date on all this, or in next quarter, next year, could we also be pulling out money from 30 years ago?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
It depends on the investigating officer of when they go in, and if it's set aside for evidentiary value, then it depends on the investigating officer letting property division know that the money can be moved into the checking account so that it can start this 3-year process. So that happens on an ongoing basis.
So this potentially could be a lot of more money out there. That, I mean, if we did something to kind of speed it up, we could.
We've done what we can as far as the money that's been deposited. That was that effort a few years ago. Every once in a while, we go back and get the detectives to kind of clean up these cases. It's a very dynamic process. And I would imagine if we looked at the file that some of that real old money is probably in pennies, and we get that. So, and we also try to go back. We've also made an effort on the money that has biological evidence on it. That has to sit off to the side, and we work with the bank in order to get that money, to get it credited, because it can't be deposited. So.
Okay, anything further? I think we would all just encourage the department to continue to use every effort to try to move these off the books as fast as possible,
Yeah.
because, I mean, if it is pennies,
Yeah.
you're spending a lot more just to maintain it on, your records than
Yeah,
it's worth.
yeah.
So, let's continue to
Yeah,
quickly purge
we'll
this.
do another big push. We'll go
Great.
back and do another big push.
Okay, so without objection then, it'll be the action of the committee to approve finance's recommendations. Thank you very much. I think that completes our regular agenda items and leaves only our closed session items 1 through 3. Is there anybody wishing to offer public comment on any of the closed session items, 1, 2, or 3? Seeing none, public comment on those matters is closed, and we will now proceed to closed session.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Before we do, yes.
On behalf of the City Attorney's Office, I just want to let everybody know that this committee will now go into closed session pursuant to Government Code 54956.9, D1, and D2, as well as E2, to confer with legal counsel on the matters that have been scheduled for today's closed session
Great.
session.
All right. Thank you very much. And we'll begin with item number 1. Concluded our agenda items, and we are adjourned.